The Hells Angels biker found the little girl studying a map carved in metal, and its final mark led to a dead brother. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. The wind howled through the empty streets as the biker, a weathered man in his late 40s, roared down the highway on his Harley-Davidson. His leather jacket, adorned with the Hells Angels patch, flapped in the wind. The night was cold, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional crackling of the radio. He had been riding for hours, his mind consumed with the weight of his past, the things he'd done, and the things he'd left behind. He didn't expect anything unusual tonight, just another ride to clear his mind. But then, something caught his eye. It was a flash of movement, something small, something that didn't belong in the desolate stretch of highway he was on. He slowed down, scanning the area, and that's when he saw her. A little girl, no older than 10, sitting on the side of the road. Her tiny figure was barely visible in the dim light of the street lamp. She was hunched over, her focus entirely on something in her hands. The biker pulled over, his boots hitting the cold ground with a thud as he approached her. "Hey, you okay?" he called out, his voice rough from years of riding and smoking. The little girl looked up, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of fear and curiosity. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she shifted slightly, revealing a small metal object in her hands. It was a map, but not just any map. This one was intricately carved into the surface of the metal, with symbols and markings that seemed to tell a story of their own. The biker's heart skipped a beat. He had seen maps like this before, ones that led to things best left buried. He knelt down beside the girl, his instincts telling him that this was more than just a coincidence. "What is this?" he asked gently, trying to suppress the growing sense of unease. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "It's my daddy's map. He said it would lead me to something important." The biker frowned, his mind racing. He had no idea who this little girl was, or what she was doing here in the middle of nowhere with a map that seemed to carry so much weight. "Where's your dad?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. The girl's eyes lowered, and for a moment, she looked as if she might cry. "He's gone," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker's heart ached as he processed her words. There was something about her, something that pulled at him. He had spent years pushing people away, but this little girl, sitting there alone with her father's map, seemed to be asking for help in a way he couldn't ignore. "Where does this map lead?" he asked, his tone firm but kind. The girl looked up at him, her expression serious now. "To the place where my daddy died," she replied. The biker felt a chill run down his spine. There it was. The connection he hadn't wanted to admit was there. This map, this little girl, all of it had to do with a past he thought was long buried. He had to make a decision. Should he walk away, like he had walked away from so many things in his life? Or should he follow the map, follow this girl, and uncover the secrets of his past that he'd been running from for so long? As the wind picked up, the biker made his choice. He would follow the map. Whatever it took, he was going to find out what this little girl knew, and what her father's death had to do with him. The biker stared at the metal map in the girl's hands, his mind racing. There was something deeply familiar about the design, something that triggered memories he had long buried. His instincts told him this was no ordinary map, and the girl, despite her fragile appearance, seemed to hold the key to unraveling a mystery he had been running from for years. "Let's get you inside," he said softly, his voice gruff but kind. The girl nodded silently, clutching the map closer to her chest, as if it were a lifeline. He helped her onto his bike, and they sped off, the cold night air biting at their faces as they headed towards the biker's old garage on the outskirts of town. The garage, a place that had once been his sanctuary, now felt more like a prison. It had been years since he'd stepped foot in there, but tonight, it was the only place he could think of where they might be safe. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, the girl looked up at him with wide eyes. "What are we going to do now?" she asked quietly. The biker paused, his hand resting on the handlebars as he looked down at her. "We'll figure it out. Just stick with me." He helped her off the bike, and they walked into the dimly lit garage, the familiar smell of motor oil and rust filling the air. It was cold inside, the only light coming from a single bulb hanging overhead. The girl looked around, her eyes scanning the cluttered space. "This place is," she trailed off, unsure of how to describe it. "It's where I used to work," he replied, his tone flat. He wasn't sure why he was telling her this, but something about her presence made him feel like he didn't have to hide anymore. She looked at him, sensing the sadness in his voice. "What happened to your job?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. The biker didn't answer immediately. He set the map down on the workbench and began to examine it more closely. It was old, weathered, with worn edges and faded markings, but it was clear that it had been meticulously crafted. The symbols etched into the metal were not just random. They told a story, one that the biker was beginning to recognize. As he studied the map, the girl moved closer, peering over his shoulder. "Do you know what this means?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "I think I do. This map, it's tied to something from my past. Something I thought I'd left behind." The girl's eyes widened in surprise. "You mean it's connected to your family?" she asked. The biker hesitated, then nodded. "Something like that." He leaned closer to the map, his fingers tracing the faded markings. "This is the way to my brother's old cabin. But it's more than just a cabin. It's where everything changed for me." The girl looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked. The biker let out a deep sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I was a different man back then. Before the Hells Angels, before all the violence and the drugs. I was just a kid, trying to make sense of the world. My brother and I, we were close. But then, something happened." He paused, his throat tightening. "My brother was killed, and I never got the chance to make it right." The girl looked at him, her face full of sympathy. "I'm sorry," she said softly. The biker shook his head, his jaw clenched. "I don't want your pity. But this map, it's my chance to find out the truth. To finally understand what happened." He stood up, looking at the girl. "I have to go. You can stay here if you want. But I can't do this alone." The girl hesitated for a moment, then stood up. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice firm. "You don't have to do this alone." The biker looked at her, surprised. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded. "I'm sure. You're not the only one who's lost someone." The biker studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's do this." He grabbed a flashlight and a duffel bag from the shelf, throwing it over his shoulder. The girl grabbed her jacket, pulling it tightly around herself as they headed for the door. As they stepped outside, the biker glanced at the night sky. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and clear. The cold was biting, but it felt like a new beginning. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter where it led. They would follow the map and find the answers that had eluded him for so long. As they walked down the driveway, the biker's heart raced. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something different. The biker and the girl walked side by side through the night, their footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway as they made their way toward the dense woods. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that only comes when you're about to face the unknown. The girl, her eyes wide with determination, held the metal map tightly in her hands. Every step she took seemed to echo the weight of her father's past, a past that had led them both to this moment. The biker glanced at her, wondering what drove her to keep moving forward, despite the danger that was surely ahead. He had his own reasons for following this path. For too long, he had pushed away the ghosts of his past, telling himself that he was better off leaving them behind. But tonight, as they made their way through the woods, those ghosts were closing in, and he knew there would be no running from them anymore. "You sure about this?" the biker asked, his voice gruff but softer than usual. The girl nodded without hesitation. "I want to know what happened to my dad," she said, her voice steady. "And I want to help you find the answers you need." Her words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just about the map or the clues that would lead them to the truth. It was about something deeper. It was about redemption. The biker had spent so many years hiding from his past, believing that his actions couldn't be undone. But now, with this little girl by his side, he was beginning to see that maybe, just maybe, he still had a chance to make things right. They reached the edge of the woods, where the trees grew thick and twisted, casting long shadows in the dim light of the flashlight. The biker stopped and turned to the girl. "This is it," he said quietly, his breath visible in the cold night air. He had been here before, many years ago. It was the place where everything had changed, the place where his brother had died. The memory was sharp, cutting through him like a blade. He had tried to bury it, to forget it, but it had always lingered in the back of his mind, haunting him, reminding him of what he had lost. The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and concern. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker took a deep breath and looked around, the memories flooding back. "This is where my brother and I used to come when we were kids. We'd camp here, build fires, and talk about everything and nothing. But one night, he didn't come back. He was found dead, out here in these woods. No one knew what happened. The police thought it was an accident. But I think it was something more." The girl's eyes widened, and she took a step closer. "You think someone did it?" she asked. The biker didn't answer right away. He couldn't. He had never been able to prove anything, and the truth was something he was afraid to face. "I don't know," he said finally. "But I have to find out. For him. For me." He looked down at the map again, the metal surface reflecting the pale light of the flashlight. The markings on the map were starting to make sense now. The final destination, the place marked with an X, was just up ahead. The girl stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the map. "We're close," she said. The biker nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Yeah, we are." As they moved deeper into the woods, the biker's mind raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and every sound, every rustle of the leaves, felt like a threat. They reached a small clearing, the ground covered in moss and the air thick with the smell of earth and pine. In the center of the clearing stood an old, weathered cabin, its walls sagging and its roof caved in from years of neglect. The girl took a step forward, her voice barely a whisper. "This is it. This is where my dad's map ends." The biker stood still for a moment, taking in the sight of the cabin. It was exactly as he remembered it, a place frozen in time, haunted by the memories of the past. He had never imagined that he would return here, but now, standing in front of it, he knew that there was no turning back. The girl moved closer to the cabin, her small hand reaching out to touch the door. "We have to go inside," she said. The biker nodded, his grip tightening on the flashlight as he followed her. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The air was thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned under their weight as they stepped inside. The girl shone the flashlight around, her eyes scanning the room. "There's something here," she said, her voice full of wonder. The biker's heart raced as he looked around the room. There, in the corner, was an old trunk, its surface covered in layers of dirt and cobwebs. The girl moved toward it, her hand trembling as she reached for the latch. "This is it," she whispered. The biker nodded, feeling a surge of anticipation. This was the moment when everything would change. The girl opened the trunk, revealing a stack of old letters, photographs, and a small, rusted box. The biker's eyes narrowed as he reached for the box, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. What he found inside would change everything, but for now, he couldn't even begin to imagine what it would mean. The biker's hand shook as he lifted the rusted box from the trunk. It was heavier than he had expected, and the weight of it seemed to press down on him, much like the burden of his past. The girl stood behind him, her breath shallow, eyes wide with curiosity. The flashlight flickered in the darkness of the cabin as they both stared at the box. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of the wind howling through the cracks in the cabin's walls. "What's inside?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The biker didn't respond at first. His fingers trembled as he pried open the box, the metal lid creaking as it gave way. Inside, nestled between layers of old cloth, was a collection of photographs, letters, and a small, leather-bound journal. The biker's heart raced as he pulled out the journal. The leather was worn, the edges frayed from years of use. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the faded pages. Each page was filled with handwriting, neat and precise, detailing moments from his brother's life. Moments the biker had never known about. There were stories of laughter, of adventures, of a life that had been stolen too soon. The biker felt a lump form in his throat as he read through the pages, each word a reminder of the brother he had lost. The girl moved closer, peering over his shoulder at the journal. "Is it your brother's?" she asked softly. The biker nodded, unable to speak for a moment. had always thought of his brother's death as a tragedy, a moment of fate that had torn his world apart. But now, as he read the journal, he realized there was so much more to the story. His brother had left behind more than just memories. He had left a legacy, one that had been hidden for all these years. The biker turned the page, his finger tracing the ink as he read a passage aloud. The map leads to something hidden, something no one can find. But it's not just about the treasure, it's about the truth. The truth about what happened to the family, and what we've all lost. The girl's eyes widened. What does that mean? She asked. The biker set the journal down and looked at her, his expression hardening. It means my brother didn't die by accident. There's something more to this, something deeper. And whatever it is, we need to find it. The girl nodded, her eyes filled with determination. How do we start? She asked. The biker closed the journal with a snap. We follow the map, he said firmly. We follow the path he left behind. The map, now more significant than ever, was spread out on the table before them. The biker's eyes scanned it, tracing the marks and symbols that had been carved into the metal. It wasn't just a map. It was a guide to something that had been hidden for years, something that could change everything. The girl leaned in closer, pointing to a spot on the map. This is where it ends, she said quietly. The biker studied the mark, recognizing it immediately. It was a place he knew well, a place that held memories he had tried to forget. That's the old mill, he said, his voice low. We have to go there. The girl looked up at him, her face filled with uncertainty. Are you sure? She asked. The biker nodded, his jaw set. We don't have a choice. Whatever this is, it's all connected. And it ends at that mill. They both stood up, the weight of what was ahead pressing down on them. The biker grabbed his jacket and pulled it on, the familiar weight of the leather a comfort, even as his mind raced with the implications of what they were about to uncover. We'll go at first light, he said, his voice determined. Get some rest. We'll need all our strength for what's coming. The girl nodded and turned toward the couch, but the biker couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he turned, scanning the cabin one last time. The place felt different now, darker, as if something had stirred in the shadows. He felt a chill run down his spine. They weren't alone, but he didn't say anything to the girl. He couldn't let her see the doubt that had started to creep into his mind. He had promised to help her find the truth, and he would. They would follow the map, they would find the answers, and together, they would uncover the secrets that had been hidden for so long. As he glanced at the metal map again, the weight of the past seemed to settle on his shoulders. This was it, the final chapter of a story that had started long before either of them had been born. Whatever lay ahead, they were in this together. And no matter what they found at the old mill, the biker knew that things would never be the same again. The first light of dawn filtered through the trees as the biker and the girl made their way toward the old mill. The map, now worn with use, was still clutched tightly in the girl's hands, her fingers tracing the markings with a sense of urgency. The biker walked a few steps ahead, his mind focused on the task at hand. There was something about this place, something that didn't sit right with him. The memories of his brother, the secrets he'd buried for years, all of it felt like it was closing in on him. He glanced back at the girl, who was moving with a quiet determination. She was a lot stronger than she appeared, and he couldn't help but respect her for it. She had been through so much already, yet she was still holding on to hope. We're almost there, he said quietly, his voice cutting through the silence of the early morning. The girl nodded, her face serious but calm. I know, she replied. They reached the edge of the clearing, where the old mill stood. The structure was dilapidated, its wooden walls cracked and weathered by time. The roof had caved in, and the once sturdy foundation now looked fragile, as if it could collapse at any moment. The place had always been a source of mystery for the biker. It was here that his brother had disappeared all those years ago, and now, standing in front of it again, he could feel the weight of that loss pressing down on him. This is it, the biker muttered, his voice heavy. This is where it all ended. The girl stepped forward, her eyes scanning the surroundings. What do we do now? She asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. The biker took a deep breath, steeling himself. We go inside, he said. We find out what's been hidden here. He led the way into the mill, the creaking floorboards groaning beneath their feet as they stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the corners. The girl coughed as she stepped deeper into the darkness, but she didn't hesitate. The biker moved ahead, shining his flashlight around the room. The place was empty, except for broken machinery and piles of debris scattered across the floor. Nothing seemed to have been touched in years. But there, in the far corner of the room, something caught the biker's eye. It was a wooden chest, old and battered, but still intact. He walked toward it, the girl following closely behind. "What do you think is inside?" she asked. The biker didn't answer at first. He had a feeling, deep in his gut, that this chest held the key to everything. He knelt down in front of it, his hands trembling as he pried open the lid. Inside, there were more photographs, his brother's photographs, along with old letters and a few personal items that belonged to him. But there was something else, something that made the biker's heart race. A small metal box, engraved with the same symbols that had been on the map. He pulled it out carefully, his hands shaking as he opened it. Inside was a piece of paper, folded neatly. The biker unfolded it, his eyes scanning the words. "The truth is buried here," it read. "The one who killed me is closer than you think." The biker's blood ran cold as he read the words over and over. "What does it mean?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. The biker looked up at her, his mind racing. The truth was right in front of him. The person who had killed his brother, the one who had kept the secrets for all these years, it was someone he knew, someone close to him. "I don't know," he said, his voice low. "But I'm going to find out." The girl stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone," she said softly. "We'll figure this out together." The biker nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over him. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was facing this alone. He stood up, pocketing the metal box and the letter. "We need to go," he said. "There's more to this. We have to finish what we started." As they left the mill and made their way back to the bike, the biker's mind was spinning. He had always thought the answers were lost, buried with his brother. But now, the truth was within reach, and it was only a matter of time before everything came to light. The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination. "We'll make sure your brother's death isn't in vain," she said. "We'll find the truth." The biker gave a small nod, feeling a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. As they rode off into the distance, the wind in their faces, the biker knew that this journey was far from over. There were more secrets to uncover, more answers to find, and he was ready to face whatever came next. The ride back to the garage was filled with an uneasy silence. The biker's mind was racing, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, but still leaving too many unanswered questions. The letter in his pocket burned against his chest, the words echoing in his mind. The truth is buried here. His brother's death, the secrets surrounding it, and the cryptic message all pointed to one thing. The killer was closer than he had ever imagined. The girl, sitting behind him on the bike, seemed lost in her own thoughts, her eyes distant as she held the metal map tightly in her hands. He glanced back at her, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, the rumble of the Harley barely drowning out his words. The girl didn't immediately respond. But after a moment, she nodded. "I'm fine," she said quietly, but he could hear the uncertainty in her voice. He wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but something told him that this journey wasn't just about finding the truth for him. It was for her, too. The girl had lost her father, and this map, this mystery, had brought them together. He had promised to help her find the answers, but now, as they rode through the early morning fog, he realized that the answers were not just for her. They were for him, too. He had spent years running from his past, from the death of his brother, and now, that past was catching up with him. "We're almost there," the biker said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. The girl's hand tightened around the map, her grip firm. "Where exactly is this place?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. The biker looked ahead, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the familiar silhouette of the old garage in the distance. "This is where it all started," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And this is where it's going to end." He pulled into the driveway of the garage, the gravel crunching beneath the bike's tires. The garage, once a place of solace, now felt like a haunted memory. The biker killed the engine and sat there for a moment, taking in the sight of the place that had shaped his life in so many ways. The girl slid off the bike, looking around as if seeing the place for the first time. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. The biker took a deep breath and stood up, his boots heavy against the gravel. "This is where my brother and I used to work," he said, his voice distant. "We spent years fixing bikes, living the life we thought we wanted. But something went wrong, something that changed everything." The girl nodded, sensing the pain in his words. "And your brother?" she asked gently. The biker's jaw tightened, and he looked away. "He's gone," he said flatly. "He died here, and I never got the chance to make it right." The girl stepped closer, her hand resting on his arm. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. "I'm here." The biker looked down at her, her words offering him a small measure of comfort. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel completely alone. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough. "But this is something I have to face on my own." He turned toward the garage, his mind made up. It was time to uncover the truth. They walked inside, the door creaking as they stepped into the dimly lit space. The smell of old oil and metal filled the air, and the sound of their footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. The girl followed closely behind, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The garage was just as he remembered, cluttered with old tools, forgotten parts, and piles of dust. The workbench, once a place where he and his brother had spent countless hours fixing bikes, was now empty, the tools left abandoned. He walked over to it, running his fingers over the worn surface, memories flooding back. "We used to fix bikes here, laugh, and talk about the future," he said, his voice distant. But then he was gone, and everything fell apart. The girl stepped forward, looking around. "Do you think you'll find the answers here?" she asked. The biker nodded slowly. "I have to," he said, his voice filled with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He moved toward the back of the garage, where a large, rusty filing cabinet sat in the corner. He pulled open the top drawer, his heart pounding as he sifted through old papers and files. There was nothing there at first, just a collection of receipts, repair orders, and old documents. But then something caught his eye. A small, yellowed envelope, sealed with a wax stamp. He pulled it out, his hands trembling as he opened it. Inside, there was a letter, written in his brother's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this," the letter began, "then you've already found the map. I never wanted you to find out this way, but the truth has to come out. Someone you trust is behind this. The secrets we've been hiding will destroy everything if you don't act fast." The biker's heart skipped a beat as he read the words over and over. The letter was a message from his brother, a final warning, and the truth it contained was more dangerous than he could have imagined. He looked up at the girl, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and fear. "We need to go," he said, his voice tight. "Now." They didn't speak as they left the garage, the weight of the letter hanging heavy between them. The answers were within reach, but now, the danger was closer than ever. The biker could feel it. Someone was watching, someone who didn't want the truth to come out. But he couldn't stop now, not when he was this close. They had to finish this. For his brother, for the girl, and for themselves. The biker's hands trembled as he gripped the wheel of the motorcycle, the engine roaring beneath them as he and the girl raced down the narrow, winding road. The letter from his brother weighed heavily in his pocket, the words seared into his mind. Someone he trusted, someone close to him, was behind everything that had happened. The truth was closer than ever, but it was dangerous. He could feel it. The closer they got, the more the sense of being watched, of being hunted, crept over him. The girl, sitting behind him, seemed just as tense, her grip tight on his waist as the wind whipped past them. "Do you think we're getting closer?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the roar of the bike. The biker glanced at her, his jaw clenched. "I don't know," he said, his voice low. "But I do know this. The closer we get, the more dangerous it's going to get." The girl nodded, her face serious. They had been through so much already, and there was no turning back now. As they reached the edge of town, the biker slowed the bike, his eyes scanning the streets. He had been here before, many times. This was where it had all started, where his brother's death had been covered up, where the lies had begun. He parked the bike in the alley behind the old bar, the place where they had once gone to drink, laugh, and forget about everything else. The girl slid off the bike and followed him, her eyes darting around, as if expecting someone to jump out at them from the shadows. "What now?" she asked, her voice tense. The biker didn't answer immediately. He walked toward the back door of the bar, the same door he had used countless times before. The memories flooded back, memories of his brother laughing, drinking, telling stories. They had been invincible back then. But now, everything had changed. The biker's hand rested on the door handle, and he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. "We find the truth," he said finally. "Whatever it takes." He pushed the door open, the familiar smell of stale beer and smoke hitting him immediately. The place was empty now, the lights dim. The jukebox was silent, and the bar stools were vacant. But he could still feel the presence of the past, as if the ghosts of all the things they had done were lingering in the air. "Where do we go?" the girl asked, her voice quiet as she stepped inside. "We go to the back," the biker replied. He motioned for her to follow as he made his way to the storage room in the back of the bar, a place that had once been off-limits to everyone except the people who ran the business. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the dim light of the room barely illuminating the stacks of old crates and boxes. But in the corner, there was something different, something that didn't belong. A large wooden chest, the kind that was used to store valuables, sat against the wall. The biker walked over to it, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. He reached down and opened the chest, the hinges squeaking as the lid lifted. Inside was a collection of old files, photographs, and documents, just like the ones his brother had kept. But there was one thing that caught his eye, a small, folded envelope. He picked it up, his hands shaking as he opened it. The contents were simple, just a few words, written in the same handwriting as the letter his brother had left behind. "The man who killed me is in the room with you. Trust no one." The biker's blood ran cold as he read the words. The truth was right here, but it was more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He turned to the girl, his face pale. "We're not alone," he said, his voice tight. "Someone's here. Someone we didn't expect." The girl looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice shaking. The biker didn't answer right away. He knew. They were walking a fine line now, one that could lead them straight into the hands of the people who had killed his brother. He had no idea who to trust, but he knew one thing. He couldn't back down. "Not now. We get out of here," he said, his voice low. "And we figure out who's behind this." As they turned to leave the room, the sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. The biker's heart raced as he spun around, his hand reaching for the gun tucked into the back of his waistband. But the door to the storage room was already closing, and the figure that stood in the doorway was one he knew all too well. "You shouldn't have come back," the man said, his voice cold and menacing. "Now you've made a big mistake." The biker's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on the gun. "You're the one who made the mistake," he said, his voice steady. "Now you're going to pay for it." The tension in the room was palpable as the man stepped forward, his hand reaching for something hidden in his jacket. The biker knew this was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment when the truth would finally be revealed. But as the man's hand emerged from his jacket, the biker realized that he was not holding a gun. He was holding a file. "This is for you," the man said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The truth you've been searching for. But I doubt you'll like what you find." The biker took the file, his eyes locked on the man's face. "Let's see if you're telling the truth," he said, his voice low. The man smirked. "You'll find out soon enough." The biker opened the file, his eyes scanning the documents inside. What he found there would change everything. The man's smirk faded as the biker read the pages, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about his brother's death. This was bigger than that. Much bigger. The biker stared at the file in his hands, his eyes scanning the pages, each word more shocking than the last. It wasn't just about his brother anymore. This file contained secrets, truths about the entire organization, about the corruption that had been buried for years. His pulse quickened as he flipped through the pages, his mind racing. The man in front of him watched silently, his smirk now gone, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "You're starting to understand, aren't you?" the man said, his voice low and dangerous. "You thought you were uncovering your brother's murder, but it's so much more than that. It's about power, control, and the ones who pull the strings from behind the scenes." The biker didn't answer, his focus on the documents in his hands. The truth was right in front of him, but it was almost too much to take in. He had known there was more to his brother's death than what the police had told him, but he never imagined this. The biker looked up from the file, his eyes locking with the man's. "This is bigger than I thought," he muttered, his voice thick with disbelief. The man nodded, his eyes cold. "Of course it is. This goes all the way to the top. The ones you thought were on your side, they've been using you. The biker's mind raced as he processed the implications of what he had just read. The names in the file were all too familiar. The people he had trusted, the people who had called him a brother, had all been part of the conspiracy. They had orchestrated his brother's death, and now, they were pulling the strings behind the scenes, using him and others like him for their own gain. The girl, who had been standing silently beside him, finally spoke. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice quiet but filled with determination. The biker didn't answer right away. He couldn't. The weight of the truth was almost too much to bear. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back down now. He had come too far, and the girl had risked everything to help him. "We take them down," he said finally, his voice steady. "All of them." The man in front of them scoffed. "You think you can take down the entire organization?" he asked, his tone mocking. "You have no idea what you're up against." The biker's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer to the man. "I don't need to take them all down. I just need to take you down. You're the one who's been pulling the strings, and you're the one who's going to pay." The man's smirk returned, but it was short-lived. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun, and aimed it at the biker. The biker didn't flinch. He had faced worse before. "You're not the one who's in control here," the man said, his voice filled with venom. "You're just a pawn, and you always will be." The biker didn't move. He wasn't afraid of the man or the gun. He had something far more dangerous on his side, his determination. "We'll see about that," the biker said quietly. Without warning, he lunged forward, knocking the man's arm to the side and sending the gun skittering across the floor. The man stumbled back, but before he could regain his footing, the biker was on him, pinning him to the ground. "I'm not a pawn," the biker said, his voice low and dangerous. "And neither is she." He nodded toward the girl, who had moved to the side, watching the scene unfold with a calmness that surprised him. The man's eyes flickered with fear for the first time. "You think you can get away with this?" he spat. "You think you can expose us and live to tell the tale?" The biker's grip tightened on the man's throat, his face inches from his. "I'm not going to expose you," he said quietly. "I'm going to end you." Just as the biker was about to make his move, the sound of footsteps echoed through the room. The girl tensed, and the biker knew they weren't alone. He glanced at her, and she nodded, signaling that she had heard it too. "We have to go," the biker said quickly, pulling the man off the ground and shoving him toward the wall. The man stumbled, but the biker didn't wait for him to recover. He grabbed the girl's arm and started toward the door, his mind already racing with their next move. "You'll regret this," the man called after them, his voice dripping with venom. "You have no idea what you're getting into." The biker didn't look back as they ran toward the exit. The truth had been exposed, but there was still more to uncover, more to fight for. As they burst out into the street, the biker pulled the girl close. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice urgent. "But we're not done. Not by a long shot." The girl nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "Where do we go now?" she asked. The biker didn't hesitate. "We go to the people who can help us," he said. "And we take down every last one of them." He started the bike, the engine roaring to life. As they sped off into the night, the biker knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead was dangerous, and the people they were up against would stop at nothing to silence them. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. This fight was personal now, and he would stop at nothing to see it through. The bike roared through the winding streets, the sound of the engine drowning out the thumping of the biker's heart. The girl was pressed against his back, her arms wrapped tightly around him, her body tense with fear. He could feel her breath quicken, her grip tighten as they sped through the city, their destination unclear, but their purpose burning brighter than ever. The man they had just confronted was right. They were up against something far bigger than they had imagined. The biker's mind raced as he processed everything that had happened. The file, the letter, the confrontation, it all led to this moment. A moment where everything they had worked for, everything they had fought for, was about to be tested. The girl spoke up, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Where are we going?" she asked, her words filled with uncertainty. The biker's gaze flickered to the rearview mirror. "To the people who can help us," he replied. "We need to lay low for a while, regroup, and figure out our next move." He didn't want to admit it, but he knew they were running out of time. The more they uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. The enemy was closing in, and they needed to be smart if they were going to make it out alive. "I don't like this," the girl said, her voice trembling. "I don't like what we're getting into." The biker's grip on the handlebars tightened, his knuckles white as he fought the overwhelming sense of dread creeping up on him. "I don't like it either," he muttered. "But we don't have a choice." As they turned onto a quieter road, the biker slowed the bike, his eyes scanning the area. He had a plan, but it was risky, too risky, even. But they didn't have the luxury of time, and if they didn't act now, they might never get another chance. He glanced over his shoulder at the girl, who looked back at him with wide eyes, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "Stay close," he said, his voice firm. "No matter what happens, you stay close to me. Do you understand?" The girl nodded, her eyes steely with resolve. "I understand," she replied. The biker could see the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen in himself when he was younger, before the Hells Angels, before the betrayal, before everything went wrong. He couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. She was strong, stronger than most people he knew. But she was also vulnerable, and that made her a target. He couldn't afford to let anything happen to her. As they neared their destination, the biker's mind wandered back to the file, to the name on the page that had haunted him ever since he had read it. The name of the person who had been behind his brother's death. The person who had orchestrated everything, pulling the strings from behind the scenes. It was someone he knew, someone he had trusted, someone he had once called a brother. The bike came to a halt in front of an old, run-down building. The biker killed the engine and turned to the girl. "We're here," he said, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of tension. The girl looked up at the building, her eyes scanning the area. "This is it?" she asked, her voice filled with doubt. The biker nodded. "This is the place." They dismounted, and he motioned for her to follow him. The building was quiet, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. It looked abandoned, but the biker knew better. There was more to this place than met the eye. He pushed open the door, the rusted hinges squealing as they gave way. Inside, the room was dark, the only light coming from a single flickering bulb overhead. Dust covered the floor, and old crates and boxes were stacked haphazardly in the corners. The girl stepped inside, looking around nervously. "What are we looking for?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The biker didn't answer at first. He was listening, his senses on high alert. He could feel it, the presence of someone who had been here, watching them. He moved forward, his boots silent on the floor as he made his way toward the back of the room. He knew what he was looking for, but the question was, would he find it in time? As he reached the far wall, his hand brushed against a dusty shelf, knocking a few old items to the floor. The sound echoed through the room, breaking the silence. A voice from the shadows called out, low and mocking. "Did you really think you could hide forever?" The biker froze, his body tensing. He had known they were being watched, but he hadn't expected this. He turned slowly, his hand reaching for the gun at his side. "You," he growled, his voice filled with a mixture of fury and disbelief. From the shadows, a figure stepped forward, a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a leather jacket with the familiar markings of the Hells Angels. The biker's heart skipped a beat. It was someone he had known, someone he thought was dead. "You should have stayed away," the man said with a cruel smile. "But now, you've walked right into my trap." The girl took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. The biker's grip on his gun tightened, but he didn't draw it. "Not yet. I won't let you get away with this," he said through gritted teeth. "You'll pay for everything you've done." The man chuckled, stepping closer. "You think you can stop me? You think you can stop all of us?" He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small device. "I've already won," he said with a smirk. "And now, you'll see just how far I'll go to make sure you don't ruin everything." The biker's mind raced. He had to act fast. He had no choice now. Everything had led to this moment, and there was no turning back. The tension in the room was palpable as the biker and the man exchanged silent glares. The device in the man's hand, which had once seemed like an ordinary object, now felt like a ticking time bomb. The girl behind the biker shifted uneasily, her eyes darting between the two men. The biker kept his focus on the man, the familiar face that had once been a part of his life, someone he had trusted. The man chuckled softly, sensing the biker's hesitation. "You know," he said, his voice dripping with malice, "you're not the first to think they can outsmart me. But I'm the one who pulls the strings, not you." The biker's jaw clenched. Not anymore, he growled, his voice low and dangerous. The man raised his eyebrows, surprised by the biker's defiance. Oh, so you think you have control now? You think you can turn the tables? He said, stepping closer, the device still in his hand. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with, the biker said through gritted teeth. And it's you. It always has been you. The man's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening around the device. This ends now, he hissed. But before he could make another move, the biker lunged forward. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the room, but it wasn't the sound of the biker's gun. A loud crash, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor, signaled that something, or someone, had intervened. The biker spun around, his heart racing. A tall figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the dim light from outside. The figure was wearing a similar jacket to the man on the floor, the signature Hell's Angels patch on its back. The biker's eyes widened in recognition. You, he spat. The newcomer nodded, a cold smirk spreading across his face. You should have known I wouldn't just let you walk away, he said. This was never just about your brother. It was about power. And now, it's about control. The biker's mind raced as the man stepped into the room, his movements slow but deliberate. You're with him? The biker asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The man who had been holding the device on the floor chuckled weakly, clearly struggling to regain his composure. You're not as clever as you think, he muttered, his voice strained. We've been watching you both. You were never going to win. The newcomer took a step forward, his eyes locked on the biker. You don't get it, do you? We own this city. We own everything. The biker's grip tightened on the gun in his hand, his finger twitching on the trigger. Not anymore, he said, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of rage. The newcomer chuckled, clearly unimpressed. You think you can stop us? You think a few shots and a couple of punches are going to change anything? He paused, his gaze shifting to the girl standing in the corner of the room. What's the plan then? He asked, his voice dripping with mockery. You're not going to shoot your way out of this. You never could. You and your little sidekick are out of your depth. The biker's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't flinch. We're not out of our depth, he said, his voice growing colder. You are. He glanced at the girl, who had been silent until now, watching the confrontation unfold. Her eyes were filled with fear, but there was also something else, something that made her stronger than she had seemed at first. The biker nodded at her, a silent signal. In an instant, the girl reached into her jacket and pulled out a small, gleaming object, a hidden weapon she had kept from view the entire time. The newcomer's eyes widened in shock, and before he could react, the girl fired. The sound of the shot was deafening, but the man didn't have time to recover. He stumbled backward, his face contorting in pain as he collapsed onto the floor. The biker's eyes never left the man's motionless form. You thought you were the one in control, the biker said, his voice steady now, filled with a cold satisfaction. But the truth is, you were never in control. The girl lowered the weapon, her hand steady, her expression calm despite the chaos that had just unfolded. You're right, she said softly. You were never in control. The biker turned to her, his face a mixture of surprise and admiration. You really knew how to handle yourself, he said, his voice almost approving. She smiled faintly, the first real smile he had seen from her since their journey began. I've had to learn, she replied, her voice steady. I've had to survive. The biker nodded, turning his attention back to the room. There was no time to celebrate their small victory. They had bigger problems now. The files, the letters, the map, it had all led to this moment, and now, they had to finish what they had started. But the battle was far from over. The biker knew that. This man, and the people like him, would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But they were too late. The biker and the girl had already found the truth, and there was no turning back now. We need to get out of here, the biker said, his voice filled with urgency. We've got what we came for, but we're not done yet. We need to keep moving. As they stepped over the man lying on the floor, the girl looked up at the biker. Where do we go now? She asked, her voice calm despite the danger that still loomed over them. The biker's eyes narrowed, his jaw set. We go to the heart of it all. We go to the top. We take down everyone who's been involved in this. And with that, they made their way toward the door, their mission clearer than ever before. The road ahead would be long and dangerous, but they were ready. The truth had been uncovered, and now it was time to finish what they had started. The bike's engine hummed steadily as they sped down the dark highway, the night air biting at their skin. The biker's grip tightened on the handlebars, his mind still racing over everything they had uncovered. The truth was out, but now it was time to face the real challenge. The man they had just taken down was only a small part of the larger web of corruption they were dealing with. The girl sat behind him, her arms tightly wrapped around his waist, her face set with determination. She had grown stronger over the course of their journey, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride for her resilience. "How much further?" she asked, her voice steady, though the tension in the air was palpable. "Not far," he replied, glancing back at her. "We need to get to the safe house. Once we're there, we'll figure out the next move." They had spent hours on the run, trying to stay one step ahead of anyone who might be tracking them. They were getting closer to the heart of the operation, and the risks were growing by the minute. But the biker wasn't afraid, not anymore. He had made a promise to his brother, and to the girl, that he would uncover the truth, no matter what. The safe house was in an isolated location, hidden away from the prying eyes of the world. As they neared their destination, the biker slowed the bike, scanning the road ahead for any signs of danger. The last thing they needed now was to walk into an ambush. When they finally reached the safe house, the biker quickly parked the bike and turned to the girl. "Stay close," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We're not alone." The girl nodded, her face serious. She had learned the dangers of their mission quickly, and now, more than ever, she understood the stakes. They moved swiftly toward the entrance, the biker's senses alert to every sound, every movement. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him, but he pushed it aside. There was no time for doubt. The door to the safe house creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves of old books and files, and a single lamp illuminated the cluttered desk at the far end of the room. The biker scanned the area, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. He stepped inside, motioning for the girl to follow. "We need to get to the back," he said quietly. "Check the back room. I'll cover the front." The girl nodded and moved toward the back of the house, her footsteps light but purposeful. The biker kept his eyes on the front door, his hand resting on the gun tucked into the waistband of his jeans. Every nerve in his body was on edge, ready for whatever might come next. Just as the girl reached the back room, the sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. The biker's heart skipped a beat. He motioned for the girl to stay hidden, and she quickly ducked behind a stack of crates. The biker's eyes narrowed as he watched the door creak open, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man stepping into the room. The man looked around, his eyes scanning the room before resting on the biker. "I knew you'd come here," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. The biker didn't respond immediately, his mind racing as he sized up the newcomer. He recognized the man's face from the files, another piece of the puzzle, another player in the game. "You're not welcome here," the biker said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "This ends now." The man smirked, his hand slipping into his jacket as he pulled out a gun. "I don't think you get to decide when this ends," he said, his voice filled with menace. The biker's hand shot to his gun, drawing it swiftly and aiming it at the man. "I'm done running," the biker said coldly. "And I'm done letting you control everything." The man's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "You think you can take me down? You think you can stop us?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "We're everywhere. You're just one man. One man who's about to make a huge mistake." The biker's finger tightened on the trigger, but he didn't fire. "Not yet. I'm not just one man," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving the man's. "I'm a man who's about to make you wish you never crossed me." Without warning, the biker lunged forward, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat. The man fired his gun, but the biker was already on top of him, knocking the weapon from his hand. They struggled, the biker's fists landing heavy blows, his rage fueling every movement. But the man was strong, his grip like iron as he fought back. The sound of footsteps echoed from the back room, and the biker glanced over his shoulder. The girl had emerged from her hiding spot, her face filled with determination. She was holding the small weapon she had used before, her eyes locked on the struggle between the biker and the man. "Get him!" the girl shouted, her voice filled with urgency. With her words, the biker felt a surge of energy. He twisted the man's arm, using the element of surprise to pin him to the ground. The man gasped in pain, struggling to break free, but the biker had him. "You're finished," the biker growled, his grip tightening. "You won't win. It's over." The man's face twisted in anger, but there was fear behind his eyes now. The biker's heart raced, the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he held the man down. "I'm not finished yet," the man spat, but his voice lacked conviction. The biker knew this was it. This was the end of the line. The truth had been uncovered, and now they would bring justice. The biker looked at the girl, who nodded, her face set with resolve. They were in this together. And together, they would stop the ones who had been pulling the strings. With one last push, the biker made sure the man was completely immobilized. It was over. They had won. The room was still as the biker stood over the man, his chest heaving with the weight of what had just happened. The fight had been hard, but now that the man was restrained, the reality of their situation began to settle in. The girl stood behind him, her weapon still gripped tightly in her hands, her eyes scanning the room with a look of determination. The biker turned toward her, the tension in his body easing slightly. "It's over," he said, his voice heavy, but filled with a sense of finality. The girl gave a small nod, but her face was still hard, the events they had just witnessed taking their toll on her. She had come a long way from the frightened child who had first appeared with the map. Now, she was a partner in this fight, and there was no turning back. They had uncovered the truth, but there was still one last piece of the puzzle to solve. The man they had just taken down had been part of a much larger operation, and though he had revealed some key information, there was more that still needed to be uncovered. The biker walked over to the desk in the corner, a battered old chair creaking as he sat down. He grabbed the file the man had dropped earlier and began flipping through the papers, each page revealing more details about the organization they were up against. The biker's eyes narrowed as he came across a set of names that made his blood run cold. These were the people who had been behind everything, the ones who had orchestrated his brother's death, the ones who had used him as a pawn in their twisted game. But now they were exposed. He could feel it, the weight of the final showdown ahead. "We need to go," the biker said, looking up at the girl. "There's one more thing we need to do before this is really over." The girl looked at him, her expression unreadable. "What's left?" she asked. The biker stood up, the file in his hand. "We go to the source," he said. "The one at the top. The person who's been pulling all the strings. They need to know that this ends now." The girl nodded, her face set with resolve. "Then let's do it." They both knew that this next step would be the most dangerous. They had uncovered the truth, but now they had to face the ones who had kept it hidden for so long. The biker grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, slipping it on as he motioned for the girl to follow him. "Stay sharp," he said. "We don't know what we're walking into." The girl followed him out the door, her eyes scanning the shadows. They moved quickly, silently, through the alley behind the safe house. The night was still, too still, and the biker couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They had learned that nothing was ever as it seemed, and the people they were up against were masters of deception. As they reached the street, the biker stopped, looking both ways. "We're close," he muttered. "We need to be careful. These people won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to protect themselves." The girl nodded, her fingers tightening around the small weapon she carried. "I'm ready," she said. They began to walk toward the building ahead, an old warehouse that had long been abandoned. It was the perfect cover for the people they were after. As they reached the door, the biker paused. He glanced at the girl, his eyes searching her face for a moment. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked. The girl met his gaze without hesitation. "I've been ready for a long time," she said, her voice steady. With a nod, the biker pushed open the door. The warehouse was dark, the air thick with dust. Their footsteps echoed as they made their way deeper into the space, the faint smell of oil and metal lingering in the air. The biker's heart pounded in his chest, his senses alert to every sound, every movement. They weren't alone. He could feel it. The girl moved silently beside him, her eyes scanning the room, the light from their flashlights flickering as they searched. They rounded a corner, and there, standing in the center of the warehouse, was a man. He was tall, with a cold, calculating look in his eyes. The biker's heart skipped a beat as recognition hit him. This was the one at the top, the one who had been pulling the strings all along. The girl stiffened beside him, her eyes narrowing. "You," she said, her voice steady but laced with contempt. "You've been behind all of this." The man smiled, a cruel twist of his lips. So, you've finally figured it out, he said, his voice low and calm. But you're too late. The pieces are already in motion. You can't stop what's coming. The biker stepped forward, his eyes locked on the man. I don't need to stop anything, he said, his voice cold. I just need to end it. You've been hiding behind the shadows for too long. The man's smile faltered, and for the first time, the biker saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. You think you can just walk in here and take everything from me? The man spat. You have no idea what you're up against. The biker didn't flinch. I know exactly what I'm up against, he said, his voice steady. And I'm not afraid of you. The man's expression hardened, and he stepped forward, his hand reaching for something hidden in his jacket. The biker's finger tightened on the trigger of his gun, but before he could react, the sound of sirens began to echo in the distance. The man's eyes flickered toward the sound, and for a split second, the biker saw hesitation in his eyes. You can't stop it, the man said, his voice a low growl. The wheels are already in motion. But the biker wasn't listening anymore. He had what he needed. The truth, the answers, and the determination to see it through. It's over, he said quietly. And with that, the final confrontation had begun. The sirens grew louder, closer, echoing through the empty warehouse like a warning bell. The biker stood firm, his gun aimed steadily at the man in front of him. The weight of everything they had uncovered pressed down on his chest. The truth was out, but now it was a race against time. The man before him seemed to realize the tide had turned, his face twisting with a mix of anger and fear. You think you've won? The man spat, his voice low and venomous. This isn't over. You'll never make it out alive. The biker's gaze never wavered, his finger tight on the trigger. It is over, he said, his voice calm and unwavering. You're done. Your lies, your manipulation, it all ends now. The man's smirk faltered, and for the first time, the biker saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He took a slow step forward, his chest rising and falling with each breath. You're nothing but a puppet, the man muttered, his voice shaking slightly. You have no idea what's really going on. I know enough, the biker shot back. I know that you're responsible for everything that's gone wrong. My brother's death. The secrets you've kept hidden for years. The man's eyes darted around the room, a silent plea for an escape that wasn't there. The biker could see it now, the fear, the realization that his world was collapsing around him. There's nowhere to run, the biker said coldly. This is it. The man's hand trembled as he reached for something hidden in his jacket. The biker's senses flared. He wasn't about to give him a chance to pull another weapon. He raised his gun, his finger ready to pull the trigger. But before he could act, the sound of a door slamming open behind them startled both men. The biker spun around, instinctively taking a step toward the girl, who had been standing just inside the doorway, her face pale but resolute. Get down, she shouted, her voice urgent. The biker didn't hesitate. He dove toward her, pushing her to the ground as the crack of gunfire echoed through the room. The shot missed, but just barely. Move, the biker shouted, pulling her toward the nearest exit. They scrambled toward the back of the warehouse, the man's voice shouting behind them. You can't run. It's already over. The biker and the girl didn't look back. They burst through the back door, the cool night air hitting them like a shock. The biker helped the girl to her feet, glancing down at the street ahead. They couldn't stay here. The sirens were too close. We need to get to the car, the biker said, pulling her toward the alley. The girl nodded, her face set in determination. They ran, their footsteps echoing in the quiet street, the sound of the approaching police growing louder. We can't go to the safe house, the girl said breathlessly. They'll be expecting us there. The biker's mind raced. They needed a new plan, and fast. I know, he said, glancing over his shoulder. We're going to the docks. There's a boat I know about. We can get out of here. They kept running, the night feeling darker and colder with each step. The girl looked up at him, confusion in her eyes. A boat, she asked. How does that help? The biker didn't answer right away, his mind focused on the task ahead. Trust me, he said. It's our only chance. They reached the docks in record time, the sound of their pursuers still distant but growing closer. The biker led her to a small, weathered boat tied to the dock. He had made arrangements long ago, never imagining he would be using them under these circumstances. But tonight, they had no other choice. Get in, he said, helping the girl onto the boat. The engine roared to life as he started it up, the low rumble echoing across the water. The girl held onto the side of the boat, her eyes scanning the shore. "Do you really think we'll make it?" she asked, her voice a mix of hope and fear. The biker glanced over at her, his face set. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I do know one thing. We're not going down without a fight." The girl nodded, her face hardening with resolve. They had come this far. They weren't going to let anyone take away their chance for freedom. The boat cut through the water, speeding away from the docks and toward the open sea. The city lights slowly faded behind them, replaced by the vast darkness of the ocean ahead. It was quiet for a moment, the only sound the hum of the engine and the soft splash of water against the boat. "So what now?" the girl asked, her voice steady. The biker turned toward her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Now we live," he said. "Now, we make sure they never hurt anyone again." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the night's events settling over them. But in that silence, there was a sense of relief, a sense that, for the first time in a long time, they were in control. "You know," the girl said after a moment, her voice thoughtful, "I didn't think this would end like this. I thought the truth would be some grand revelation, something that would make everything right." The biker glanced at her, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "The truth doesn't always set things right," he said softly. "But it's the first step." They continued to glide through the water, the vastness of the ocean ahead of them, endless and full of possibility. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The girl and the biker, no longer just two people chasing the truth, but a team, ready to fight for a future of their own making. And in that moment, the biker knew that no matter how hard the road ahead might be, they were finally free.